Right then, hopefully the technology will work. So, Shelter Cymru, just briefly, is Wales' leading people and homes charity. We exist to tackle the housing emergency because we understand that home is everything. For us, the fight for home is about ensuring everyone has access to a safe, secure, suitable, and genuinely affordable home. To make this vision a reality, we work tirelessly providing free, confidential, and independent advice to anyone who needs it, ensuring they have support to meet their immediate housing need. We also campaign to tackle the causes of the housing emergency, with this work rooted in the experience of our clients and caseworkers. We carry out groundbreaking research that informs our campaigning work. Our campaigning challenges the Welsh Government for changes in legislation, policies, and practices to improve housing and reduce homelessness for people in Wales. Essentially, at Shelter Cymru, we believe that everyone should have the right to a decent and affordable home, and that home is everything. I'm Ellen Grantham. I fill the private rented sector policy lead role at Shelter Cymru. That's within the policy and research team here. We've been very fortunate to receive 5 years funding for this PRS role from the Oak Foundation, so a big thank you to them. The funding has been incredibly important in allowing us to focus on the PRS in Wales, and this Understanding Affordability report is the first significant piece of work to be published thanks to that funding. Many of you will already know me, either through this role, perhaps through previous roles. I've been knocking around the housing sector for over 20 years, but this is the first role I've ever undertaken that focuses solely just on the PRS. To be honest, PRS roles are quite few and far between in the housing sector. Traditionally, the housing as a whole hasn't received, the attention that perhaps it deserved in the past on political agendas. We've seen that change over the last few years as the housing crisis has kind of worsened, really got to grips. We've seen housing creep up the political agenda, and the private renting sector has become far more relevant to a lot of people as more and more people are sort of ending up living there and struggling to afford it. Um, I'm in no doubt that there will be people in this virtual room that will be affected by issues in the PRS and affordability issues in the PRS as much as anything. So the report was published back in April this year. We'd initially hoped to get it published towards the end of 2025, but as we were researching, it kind of grew and it shifted direction a bit. It became a bit of a different beast to what we'd originally anticipated it to be. We'd thought it would be a report that would be solely focused on people's experiences of renting in the private rented sector. And it still very much is. That element is integral to this report. We conducted many, many interviews with people who were either living in or had recently been living in the PRS. And we worked closely with Shelter Cymru's PRS advisory group. They're a panel of independent people with real lived experience of the PRS in Wales. And Sam Haywood, who is a member of that group, actually wrote the foreword for the report. So the report grew and shifted a bit. And as I was concluding the interviews for the original report, and I was drafted the first, possibly the second. Oh, Robbie's just reminded me I actually need to move the slide. Sorry, everybody. Sorry. Thank you, Robbie. Yeah, so I think I drafted the second version of the report. It was well underway, and like I say, it shifted. The onus shifted a bit. We'd conducted many interviews, worked closely with the PRS advisory group. Um, but then Robin, who is our head of campaigns at Shelter Cymru, he had a bit of an epiphany. he decided that we should challenge the whole concept of affordability. We're always talking about, what is affordable? It's a bit of a vague term, to be honest. What is, affordable housing? What is affordable for a person? What's affordable to somebody else? And we've tended to rely on the ONS model of affordability for private renting in Wales. It's, in our opinion, quite an outdated model. It doesn't really it does a bit of a disservice for renters in Wales. So Robin made this kind of bold move in deciding that we should undertake some research, a lot of research, challenge that model and propose a new model based on our findings. So we've gathered a lot of data, a lot of evidence, and in order to move on with this challenge, we needed to collate this huge amount of data and evidence, and this is where Lauren Cayley stepped in. Lauren at the time was the policy and research manager here at Shelter Cymru. She's since left us for pastures new, but we were incredibly fortunate to have her working with us at the time. Lauren is a very capable and intelligent person, especially when it comes to data analysis. If you haven't already come across Lauren in your professional lives, I'm 100% certain that you will do so at some point. Importantly, also is that we were very lucky that Lauren's husband is a top IT consultant in the private sector. So Lauren was able to learn a lot from her husband. He was able to help her in learning new coding skills to be able to analyze these huge data sets that she'd gathered. We didn't have those skills in-house here at Shelter Cymru to be able to do that coding work. If it hadn't been for Lauren and her basically genius IT husband, we did not have those skills. I doubt that there's any third sector organization out there that has those skills to hand, to be honest, in-house. And I don't think we could really have afforded to buy them in either, knowing the kind of sums that professionals like that can charge. So it is thanks to Lauren and her learning these new skills that we've been able to undertake this report in this format. So Lauren wrote the report and she was supported in doing so by the Shelter Cymru advisory group, by Robin and by myself. So just to go over briefly what we're covering today, the contents, we've got 5 sections here. Why we challenge the existing model of affordability, who the private rented sector is working for, the new approach to rental affordability, how we change it, and what you can do. So why challenge this existing model of affordability? Essentially, it was because so many people were coming to Shelter Cymru needing help because they were facing homelessness, because they were struggling to afford their private rents, often because they'd faced rent increases that they just couldn't meet, or B, we have, and I'm sure those of you from local authorities can understand and relate to this. We have lots of people needing to access a private rented home. Social homes have become a very kind of scarce resource. People are really struggling to access it. Fewer and fewer people are able to do so. And if they then cannot afford to buy a property, they're having to rely on the private rented sector. And we know that people are trapped in temporary accommodation and so forth, where they literally cannot afford to access privately rented homes. 40 to 50% of Shelter Cymru's casework every month comes from households renting privately. So it forms a huge amount of the work that we do here. People tell us that they rent privately because they literally have no other choice. They can't afford to access home ownership, and despite real affordability issues that leave them living in this perpetual insecurity and at a real risk of homelessness, they can't access a social home either. There just isn't enough of them to go around. Last year, loss of rented or tied accommodation was the main reason households were threatened with homelessness. During the last Senedd term, rents in the PRS shot up by 35%, and that's an average figure. So for some people, those rents would have been very drastic. We know in our casework, through our casework, that some people see rental increases of up to 75%, just very suddenly. It's very drastic and completely unrealistic for people to be able to afford to pay those kind of rental increases. The scale of unaffordable renting has a significant impact for both individual households in Wales and for us collectively as a nation. It increases homelessness, impacts people's health, has serious financial implications for households and public spending, and it traps people in a system that just isn't working for them. So basically, we saw a gap. The existing model of affordability is one that is the one that is generally accepted, is the ONS model. I think I need to be on the next slide. There we are, that one. Sorry, guys, I've jumbled my slides up. Yeah, we've already covered these. Um, so we saw a gap between what the existing ONS data was telling us and what we were seeing on the ground here at Shelter Cymru through our casework, the people who are coming to us for help. The ONS model basically tells us that a home is affordable so long as privately renting households spend less than 30% of its gross income on rent. So that gross income is the income that you get before you pay any taxes or other deductions out of your income. It's not the real sum that you have, in your paycheck or in your income at the end of the day. I know personally, if I was living off my gross income, that, life would be much easier. So it does seem to be a bit of a funny figure to use, to be honest, because it isn't what people actually have in their budgets, in their pocket to spend. Um, we should all be familiar with this ONS model. It's been knocking around for decades. We were using it when I was studying housing at university, like over a quarter of a century ago. Housing costs across all tenures, the price of buying properties, renting, they have rocketed over the last 25 years, like increased dramatically compared to our incomes. But this model hasn't changed at all. We're still relying upon it. It's just still generally accepted. We've carried on accepting that this 30% of gross incomes definition is okay, despite, us all generally knowing that there's this huge gap between what rents are costing and what incomes actually are. And casework, the casework here at Shelter Cymru is clearly demonstrating that the people's reality is that renting has become increasingly unaffordable. So we saw a gap here between the ONS model of affordability and what we were seeing in our casework. Over the last 10 years, there's been a growing number of private renters reaching out to us at Shelter Cymru for help. And time and time again, we're seeing that the people who come to us, they're coming to us with issues of affordability. They are at risk of homelessness because they are struggling to pay their rent more often or not. It's the reoccurring kind of theme in our casework. People struggle with affordability. And like I said earlier, up to 75% of their current rent sometimes in the increases. We also hear from people who are at risk of homelessness because, oh, sorry, because they can't access privately rented homes. They can't get the deposits together. They can't meet, what the rental costs are. They just simply do not earn enough to be able to live in a privately rented home, but they aren't in a dire enough situation to be able to access a social home either. The problem, of course, with relying on this ONS model is that when we try and highlight the problem of unaffordable rents, with Welsh Government, their response in the past has been that there's a lack of actual data or evidence telling us that rents are unaffordable. We've got the added problem as well, that organisations and bodies that represent private landlords in Wales are telling everybody, telling Welsh Government that rents are actually comparatively cheap in Wales compared to England. So there's this general kind of assumption that they are affordable because they're cheaper than they are in England. Um, there's a whole lot of issues that relate to that, obviously, compared to what the incomes in Wales are. But that is the situation that we're in. So, following quite a bit of general whinging from me about how ancient and outdated the ONS model is, Robin had this epiphany that we should research and challenge the ONS model. It's been a bold move, a very bold move, one that has meant a huge amount of data collecting. And as I've already said, Lauren undertook that and all the coding work that was necessary to make sense of it. Please don't ask me any complex questions about the coding. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to um, give justice to Lauren's work in answering those questions. So, who is private renting working for? What we found. So the existing data, the existing ONS model, has been telling us that everything was pretty much okay renting privately in Wales. And when we modelled, when we modelled things against the ONS data, it told us that renting was only really unaffordable in two local authorities in Wales. Those were Cardiff and the Vale, where we all know rents are incredibly expensive. However, this was not the reality of our clients. Shelter Cymru's clients come from all across Wales, like every local authority, every four corners, every area. They come for help with issues relating to affordability. So this notion that renting is only unaffordable in two local authorities in Wales. It just didn't make sense to us here at Shelter Cymru. Um, there's a real disconnect basically between, this data and what we were seeing here. We held a lot of discussions with our private rented sector advisory group. As I said, this group of people with lived experience of living in the private rented sector. These discussions helped us to better understand where the ONS approach wasn't aligning with real world experiences. And it ultimately helped us to identify the need for a new, more person-focused approach to calculating private rented sector affordability in Wales. Right, what we found in terms of who the private rented sector is working for. As I said, we spoke extensively with the PRS advisory group about their experiences of living in, but also accessing a PRS home. And we looked a lot at our Shelter Cymru casework here, at our records. We have a huge amount of casework records on our system. And we held interviews with our caseworkers as well. They work directly with the clients who come to us, obviously. Further to this, we took a number of interviews with people who responded to our shout at our drive, I suppose, for interviewees for the research for this report. Some of them had previously sought for help from Shelter Cymru and some of them hadn't. So the main issues that private renters sought help from Shelter Cymru last year were they were being evicted. This was usually due to rent arrears because they couldn't afford their rents, usually following rental increases. They were overwhelmed by the unaffordability of their home, or rather the unaffordability. People's incomes just haven't been sufficient to meet their private rent and housing costs. I should add that many of these people will have had at least one, if not two, people working full time within the household. We're not talking always about people here with chaotic lifestyles or 0 hours contracts or so forth. Clients who come to us will often be in steady, secure, what we might deem to be reasonably paid jobs, and they are still struggling to afford their homes. Another thing that came out of this report was the issues relating to the condition of their rented homes, particularly damp and mold, and landlords not resolving it. So I think this is a good time to add that disrepair was an issue for every single person I spoke with and interviewed for this report. So although this report is focused on affordability, I couldn't ignore that disrepair was, something that everybody was referring to. The condition of the property, the damp, the mold, disrepair. Every single person I spoke to referred to it. People time and again told me that they were too afraid to report disrepair to their landlords, or if they had, they were afraid to chase it up. Two reasons for this, and that was A, they were afraid that the cost of the repairs would basically instigate a rental increase, which they couldn't afford. They just simply couldn't afford to pay any more rent. Or they were worried that the landlords would raise the rent to a point where they would lose their home, what we call a backdoor eviction, an unlawful eviction, basically, to get rid of them. In order to avoid doing the repairs, they would then maybe relet the property to somebody who would just accept the property in the state it was in, possibly for more money. So this fear of not being able to afford any further rental increases just meant people were just shutting up and putting up, to be honest. Um, One person I interviewed described to me how the door to their flat was broken. It wouldn't shut properly. They had initially reported it to the landlord, who had arranged for somebody to come out and put for a repair or a replacement. The cost turned out to be quite significant, and the landlord just never really arranged for the works to be undertaken because it was going to be expensive. The tenant was too worried to remind the landlord. They didn't want to increase, basically being evicted because they can't afford to move, or that the landlord would pass the cost on and increase the rent. They were already struggling to make ends meet and to pay the rent. Despite having a full-time wage in what you might consider, to be a good job, a stable work, they've worked their whole lives, they've got their partner's part-time income coming in. They were already struggling to pay the rent on this very modest flat. Um, and they were genuinely concerned that if the landlord chose to increase the rent, they wouldn't be able to make ends meet. They were already batch cooking, living off a lot of pasta and rice. And they were concerned that the landlord might just, I don't know, get rid of them, basically, and just either give up being a landlord or get somebody else in, and they couldn't afford, they had no money spare at the end of the month to be able to afford for a deposit for another place. They literally couldn't afford to move, the moving costs even. So they'd resorted to sleeping on the floor against the door to secure the property. This they felt was their only option of keeping the property sort of secure for them. Um, it's quite a harrowing kind of experience, and I've highlighted this one in particular just because their property was physically insecure. So it wasn't just that they were feeling insecure, the property literally was insecure, and this was somebody who had always worked full time and had that second kind of part-time income coming in as well. I can see somebody's put a hand up somewhere, but I'm not sure how to say it. Um, Sorry, I've lost that hand. If you could pop your question into the chat, I should be able to pick it up on the end there. Apologies about that. I'm really not sure how the hands work here on Zoom. So pop your question either into the chat, or if you want to forward it on to me afterwards, hopefully I'll be able to pick up on it. . Oh, sorry, my slides have decided. There we go. Right. So the PRS has grown substantially in Wales over the last decade. It's almost doubled. The growth has far outpaced all of the 10 years. There's been no clear government strategy for this growth. The PRS is now Wales's largest tenure following home ownership. There are over 230,000 homes in Wales that are privately rented. And since 2014, people have been regularly discharged from homelessness by local authorities into the PRS. A shortage of social homes means that there literally isn't much option for staff at local authorities, to be honest, to do anything but to discharge people into the PRS. So the PRS has become, in a way, part of the solution to homelessness in the eyes of the government and local authorities. Um, Although it's also obviously the underlying problem. There's been no real kind of big plan here. It is just this discharge as a response in lieu of there being no other option. Um, Beyond this kind of headline finding, the same data that can also be used to show how the expansion in the number of private renters has not been evenly spread across age ranges either. So we've seen the biggest proportional increase in people aged 55 to 64. So traditionally, it used to be that you'd find that generation rent, you thought it would be younger people, students have traditionally rented, maybe rented for a while until they find their feet, the aspiration to move into home ownership and so forth. But more and more, we are seeing that people are renting privately, and that's it. That is going to be it for life. There is no scope to move into home ownership. There is no scope to move, to get a social home. That is it. They are stuck in renting privately pretty much forever. There is no alternative option. So we're seeing more and more older people sort of stuck renting privately, and it raises some questions about the suitability of the properties for an aging population as well. So people are seriously struggling with affordability issues, and feeling trapped is a reoccurring theme that came through in the interviews that I undertook. So many people use this term trapped. Either they felt they were trapped in their existing home because they were barely surviving month to month, living month to month. They literally could not afford to leave. They cannot move into home ownership, but they literally cannot afford to leave into another PRS property either. One person described it as better the devil you know, being afraid of sort of leaping out of the frying pan and into the fire. It really is a dire situation out there for people who are privately renting homes. The other issue, of course, is the LHA rates, the LHA housing allowance, the local housing allowance. They are far too low to meet market rents in Wales in the private rented sector. If you are somebody who is dependent upon benefits, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to access a social home. There are plenty of people living on benefits who are now, living stuck in the private rented sector, and the LHA just does not meet those rents. It's a major issue. LHA is not a devolved matter. We're not asking Welsh Government to do the impossible here. We know that they have no control over LHA, but it is a real problem. It's worth noting that since this report was published back in April, we do, of course, have a new Welsh Government. A new Plaid Cymru government has been elected, and the party has already committed to a number of things in relation to affordable housing. So they've already committed to legislating for the right to adequate housing, fair rents. We're not sure what they actually mean by fair rents. There still needs to be a better definition on that, but they do say that they will be limiting annual increases. They've committed to delivering at least 20,000 new social homes by 2030, which is great. I think the reality is that we need a lot more, but that is a start. And to retrofitting homes for energy efficiency. So this question of what an affordable or fair rent is really needs to be clarified. Before the new Welsh Government can enact the commitment to fair rents, they really need to first properly understand and define what they consider a fair rent to be. It might be interpreted differently to somebody, say as a market rent. One person might say that a market rent is a fair rent. That isn't necessarily so. They really need to make clear what they consider a fair rent to be. Um, they, in our opinion at Shelter Cymru, there is nothing fair or affordable about a market rent because they are currently so high due to the demand that there is for these homes. A fair rent needs to be a rent that is set at a level that means everybody can access and afford a home without the risk of being evicted unfairly. So, in defining affordability, we spoke with the PRS advisory group, and they determined that any definition of affordability must consider net, that should be earnings, not warnings. I beg your pardon, and it's a typo. It needs to consider net earnings, not the gross. So that's the income that somebody actually has in their paycheck or in their benefits. It's after you've paid your taxes, not another deductions, not that figure that's, on your pay slip but never actually reaches our accounts. Um, an affordability needs to reflect the different income levels of different types of households. And they really need to reflect the lower income households who are forced into private renting. This is something that's been included in our definition of affordability here at Shelter Cymru. The ONS model works on the 40th percentile. We've said that it needs to work on the median kind of average of rents. That being because if you are on a lower income, you are more likely to end up needing to rent privately than if you were on a better income. If you had a higher income, chances are you might be able to access home ownership. If you're on a lower income, and you're unable to access social housing, you are going to be forced into private renting and you're likely to be forced to stay there as well. We also need a broader definition of housing costs. I'll get onto that in a bit. So two methods were used, two routes were used to gather the general data for for this research. We looked at current rents data. So this is what we gather from the ONS price index of private rents. We gathered them up, it was up to January. I think we might have put a bit more in there as the time went on. I continue to gather these monthly for every local authority in Wales so that we continuously track what average rents are in each local authority area according to different sized properties as well. The issue with these is that they're obviously backdated. You're always looking backwards at what the rents were last month or the month before by the time this data is published. So they're not especially kind of fresh, but it's the best data that we've got. The other way that we gathered data for rents for this research study was we used a service called Property Data, and that gathers all the data from Rightmove, Zoopla, and on the market for properties that have been advertised to be let. What we haven't been able to gather is properties that are let by word of mouth, and we understand that that happens a lot nowadays because landlords aren't necessarily needing to advertise their properties. As soon as there's a vacancy, a vacant property, they they go like hotcakes. They're gone before they need to advertise. I'm sure you've heard plenty of people say that they're in touch with letting agents, and when they see a property advertised, they will literally phone up within about 5 minutes and it's already gone. So any properties that haven't been advertised through Rightmove, Zoopla on the market, we have no access to that information. Nobody has access to the data relating to those. It did give us a snapshot, though, what we've done of what the rents were for February on those popular kind of websites. Um, I go back, sorry. We February we had we took in for February for those three websites we had an end data set of 4,015 homes that were listed for private rent in Wales for February 2026. So our new model of affordability, it includes, and it's very much centred upon the voices of real people with lived experience. We've worked very closely, as I said, with the PRS advisory group. We've spoken with so many people, interviewed so many people, and they've been directly involved in the research with us. Building the data set was a huge undertaking, and this is where Lauren came into play. This was very much her kind of piece of work. It was very complex, beyond my capability, a lot of it, to be honest. Um, so the data that she collected for homes, as mentioned in the last sales, it was for current rent levels from the ONS and from property data from those websites that we mentioned. Energy bills estimated costs. There's data published by the UK government about average cost associated with energy bills, aggregated by a number of options, but not by EPC rating. So Lauren did some really, really clever work with coding to sort of gather some average energy rental costs for properties, different types of properties across Wales. She did a similar thing for council tax. And as I mentioned earlier, the income estimates, she did some coding work to try and gather what people's net incomes typically are based on average earnings across Wales as opposed to gross earnings. So our new model here is different to the ONS model. The ONS model basically says that a home is affordable if it accounts for 30% of your gross income, and that's for the rental element only. We're taking into account other essential housing costs, the ones that you can't avoid. So council tax, you cannot avoid council tax. We've included that in our definition of a housing cost. The rent, the council tax, the average energy bill and the average water bill that Lauren determined from this very complex coding that she did. We focused on properties below the medium income. As I said, people in a lower financial situation are more likely to end up renting a home. Um, There'll be no surprise. I don't think, that anybody here is going to be shocked to find that our conclusion was that renting was pretty unaffordable across the whole of Wales. Shock horror, renting a private home in Wales is actually not that affordable. It's actually only affordable for households who have two full-time earners. Okay. Now, a third of households in Wales have at least one person who is on a part-time income or on no income at all. That's a third of all the households in Wales. So this is concerning to know that you have to have two full-time earners in a property, in a home, to be able to afford renting in the private rented sector, especially when we consider that more and more older people are also forced into remaining in private rented nowadays as well. Larger families are facing a very bleak reality, even if they've got full-time working adults in the home, they are facing impossible pressures. Um, for a larger family, which is the case of one third of households in Wales, there are no homes with two bedrooms or more that are affordable across the whole of Wales, according to our model of affordability. Not one, not a single property. So if you need a home that has two or more bedrooms, according to our model of affordability, which includes those household costs, the council tax, the energy bills and the water, and is based on medium rather than gross incomes, there is nowhere available for you to rent in Wales that is affordable. Um, just a quick example here of how unaffordable a home can be. So, a family who needs a three-bedroom home in Monmouthshire with only one working parent would have monthly housing costs of over £1,000 more than what Shelter Cymru would consider to be a reasonable cost for an affordable home. Which is a huge sum of money, a huge shortfall. That's £1,000 shortfall just for those housing costs every month. A single adult in their 40s renting a one-bedroom flat in Gwynedd would have to find an extra £500 every month for that property to be anywhere near affordable. So, who is private renting working for? Properties where there are two full-time working adults. If you have two or fewer children, you might be able to make it work. But that is only if you have access to plenty of low cost or free childcare, which means that the two adults can go out to work and bring in this income. If you live in mid Wales, you stand half a chance as well. Powys was more affordable than the rest of Wales. However, I keep tracking the rents, like I said, for every local authority across Wales, and I'm not convinced that Powys is going to be affordable for much longer either, to be honest, as rental prices keep increasing. Um, had a bit of data there. All right, the impact. So this is a couple of things that people told me in the interviews. This person worked time their whole life. Partner was also working full time. Both of them earning all right salaries. But by the end of the month, there was nothing, literally nothing to put away into savings by the time they've covered their rent and their housing costs, which is bleak. You know, you should be able, when you're working full time, both of you, to be able to do more than just survive. Another person saying they were living in shared accommodation and they just wanted to have their own space. They were no longer that young, to be honest, this person. They'd been sharing for a long time. Their only way out, they foresaw, out of this situation was to, was to take up a relationship, was to move in with somebody and to share a home in that sense. Somebody else told us, they compared their situation compared to what their dads used to be. By the time their dad was this age, they'd already bought a house, a big house, a gigantic house. And that was on his own single salary. It left this person feeling a bit of a failure, that they're nowhere near being able to do that they'll never be able to own their own home. It's just a very different sort of set of circumstances for people nowadays to what it was for the previous generation. The impact for the wider economy for unaffordable housing is we've got increased homelessness levels, the spending on homelessness by local authorities and Welsh Government is astronomical, as we well know. Um, Only three of the biggest PRS landlords in Wales actually live in Wales. Of the other seven, collectively, they rent out nearly 4,000 of those 23 odd thousand homes. Three live in London, two in Hertfordshire, and one of them in the Netherlands and one in Luxembourg. So it isn't as if that money is circulating in the Welsh economy. It is going out over the border into other countries for people, to enjoy. It's not sort of improving our circumstances here in Wales. Health and well-being, obviously, issues are brought on by unaffordable homes. So how do we change it? I've got some massive conclusions here. I'm probably going to have to forward them on to you. The PRS in Wales is fundamentally broken. The crisis is playing out across the whole of Wales. Every single local authority is affected, not just Cardiff, not just the Vale of Glamorgan, as the ONS data suggests. It is everywhere. Single income households are especially affected, as are larger families. So what we're asking the Welsh Government to do, we're ending them to put a ban on rent bidding. We want them to put an end on no fault, no reason evictions. We need a reform to the approach of and the end and expand the access to the assessment committee. Changes in legislation recently means that these are kind of being phased out. There has to be a way for tenants to be able to formally challenge rent increases, and that is being phased out. There's got to be a way for tenants to be able to challenge their landlords when they put unreasonable rent increases on them. Right, they want to, we would like to see increase to the nest scheme for private renters, to make homes more warmer and more efficient. Um, Existing rent controls measures need to be expanded. We've already started on our next piece of research looking into what can be done in terms of rent control. Shelter Cymru's stance is that we're pretty certain that we need some kind of rent control measure in Wales. We're not sure in what format yet, so we've started the research into what currently exists out there, what other countries are doing, what's worked, what hasn't. We're hoping to have that report published by the end of September, and we are looking to have a standpoint on this. This report is not the first report into the affordability of the PRS. It won't be the last one, but it's the first one that's actually challenge the model of affordability. And it's the first one, I think, that's put us in a position where we're able to move forward and say, do you know what? We have evidence that the PRS is unaffordable. It's no longer acceptable for Welsh Government to say, bring us the evidence. Here's the evidence. It is unaffordable. It's an issue across the whole of Wales, and something does have to be done about it. So it's paved the way for us to be able to step on to the next bit of research into rent control. So watch this space. We obviously need more social homes in Wales. We need 1 in 5 homes in Wales to be a social homes. Any counter argument about rent control is going to see a PRS landlord exodus. We're asking the Welsh Government to mitigate that, basically. If you think there's going to be a mass exodus of landlords, offer to buy their properties from them, bring them back into social use. If they choose to leave, help them do so. Take the properties, off their hands if they're happy to sell, and bring them up to a standard that they can be let as social housing units. We need year-on-year increases in the number of homes available for social rent, obviously, and we need a homelessness system that puts people first. Importantly, we need the right to adequate housing introduced in Welsh law, and the new Welsh Government has committed to this. So that is a very positive move. What you can do, I would encourage everybody in this virtual room to adopt Shelter Cymru's model of affordability. It's one that very clearly evidences that private renting in Wales is increasingly unaffordable for people. And we cannot carry on in this situation where tenants literally have no idea what rental increases they might face next week if the landlord writes out to them. Adopt this model rather than the ONS one. Promote it, use it,